Yes, we are once again in that series, Watch, Pray, and Be Ready, in which on the first weekend of the month, we are looking at current events in the light of Bible prophecy, keying mostly off of Jesus' words that are found in Matthew 24. Mark also has an addition in his 13th chapter, and Luke 21. These are familiar words to those of us who have read Matthew 24 again and again. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these things are the beginning of sorrows, or as the New International Version places it, they are the beginning of birth pangs. Within this whole package of end-time events, we are focusing specifically today on famine. Famine, and ironically, food in the future. Does what we see taking place currently have prophetic relevance to us? For us, who live in the United States of America, who live in one of the richest countries of the world, as we talk about famine, is that even relevant to us? And if we get a little bit of help from technical, we need to kind of tone down the microphone a little bit. It's a little bit echoey. So here recently, from the Wall Street Journal in July 10, not all that long ago, the headline read, "Ukraine war pushes millions of the world's poorest toward starvation." Now, if you are connected to the news at all, this is nothing new to you. This has been in the headlines quite a bit frequently. How Russia and Ukraine are major exporters of grains, wheat, sunflowers, and the war has placed a preoccupation with those two countries so that they're not exporting as they normally do, and the adverse effects will come upon some of the North African nations and other areas in that region of the globe. The Washington Post speaks about this as well. 5 countries hit hard by the grain crisis in Ukraine. And those countries involve Nigeria, Somalia, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Yemen. Ukraine and Russia produce about 1/3 of the wheat traded in the global markets and about 1/4 of the world's barley, according to the Washington-based Food Policy Research Institute. Exports from the two countries, which also include sunflower oil and corn to feed livestock, account for about 12% of total calories traded. That's a very interesting way to describe that. I didn't know that we trade calories, but I get what they're saying, and you most likely do as well. 12%, I guess, of the global calories that are traded. Now, more recently from the Washington Post, here again in July, just a couple of weeks ago, from Istanbul, there was an agreement reached between Russia and Ukraine to restart shipments of blockaded grain in a step toward easing a global crisis that has exposed tens of millions of people, especially in Africa and the Middle East, to the threat of acute hunger. Again, if you've been paying attention to the news, this is not news to you. We're simply acknowledging what has been in the headlines quite a bit here as of recent. You may also be aware of what's happening in Sri Lanka, the chaos that is taking place there. This source, the Times of India, had a headline that read, "In 10 points, how unprecedented economic crisis pushed Sri Lankans over the edge." We're not going to look at all of those 10 points, just in a summary fashion here, noting that decreased tourism during the COVID-19 pandemic was a contributor to their economic crisis. They defaulted on national debt. There was a ban on chemical fertilizers, and this led to a food shortage and inflation. A confluence of factors that brought great chaos to the island country of Sri Lanka. Now, we could look at some other examples of food shortages, food scarcity in the world, but this is enough to simply acknowledge what is happening, going on around us here currently. When we look at famine in the Bible, we see that it is something that God seemingly allows to fulfill His sovereign purpose and plan. As you recall from the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis, Joseph had been sold into slavery by his brothers. Joseph has interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh, dreams which were predicting 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. And then with the passage of time, those 7 years of famine become the reality. So Genesis 41 tells us the famine was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. When we look at this in light of the larger context of Genesis, going all the way back to chapter 15, you may recall that Abraham was told by Yahweh, by the God of heaven, that in the future, your descendants, Abraham, will be strangers in a land that is not theirs and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. So how are Abraham's descendants going to get into this foreign land? He's not given those details at all. God simply says, this is going to happen. And of course, the succeeding generations were left to play out the details of how that prophecy would be fulfilled. God allowed Israel to be afflicted to bring attention to His divine sovereignty and purpose. The way that the children of Israel, Jacob's sons and grandchildren, got into Egypt was because Joseph was sold there. If Joseph had never been sold into slavery in Egypt, at least in details that we are aware of, they would not have been down in Egypt at all. Because Jacob is sitting around with his 11 sons, because Joseph is gone, and he says, hey guys, why are you sitting here? There's grain in Egypt. Why do you look at one another? Why are we just sitting here? Go down to Egypt and see if you can acquire some food for us. So, strangely enough, it seems that God allows famine to occur, at least in this instance, in order to fulfill His sovereign purpose and plan. Seems a little bit puzzling to us, but that's the conclusion I come to as I read the narrative. So divine oversight allows famine to occur to fulfill His sovereign purpose and plan. Secondly, famine in the Bible is the result of divine warning and judgment. From Deuteronomy chapter 28, these are the words of Moses to that generation that is poised on the threshold of entering into the promised land. It shall come to pass, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all His commandments and His statutes, which I command you this day, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. Your heavens which are over your head shall be bronze, and the earth which is under your feet shall be iron. The Lord will change the rain of your land to powder and dust. From the heaven it shall come down on you until you are destroyed. So in the covenant relationship that God had with His people, He is saying that if you disobey the terms of this covenant relationship, I'm going to bring drought upon you, which will result in famine. And this happens periodically throughout the history of Israel. One of the more notable experiences, and we've looked at this from time to time in times past, is what happened during the ministry of the prophet Elijah. 1 Kings chapter 17, Elijah is speaking to King Ahab in the court. As the Lord God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall not be dew nor rain these years except at my word. And as we are familiar with that whole Elijah experience, there wasn't for about 3.5 years. No rain, no dew led to famine. Another example of famine in the Bible is that it is not only an indication of divine warning and judgment, but it is also the result of war. In 2 Kings chapter 6, it happened after this that Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, gathered all his army and went up and besieged Samaria, and there was a great famine in Samaria. In this overall experience that we find in 2 Kings chapter 6, there's a conversation that occurs between a couple of women, which is unbelievable. And that conversation went along these lines. Today, let's eat your son, and tomorrow we'll eat my son. The Bible gives us the impression that this actually happened. Except on the second day, number 2 cannibal mama defaults on the agreement. She hides her son. And so mama number 1 goes to complain to the king about it. We had this agreement. We ate my son, but now she's hidden her son. Such is the result of famine. Drives people to extreme. Examples of famine in the Bible. Seemingly, in certain instances, to fulfill some sovereign purpose and plan. Famine is a result of divine warning and judgment, and famine is the result of war. So we refresh ourselves once again with Matthew 24. There will be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. And from a New Testament fulfillment of Jesus' prophecy, we read in Acts chapter 11 that there was a prophet named Agabus. This probably occurred maybe 25, 30 years after Jesus had ascended back to heaven. So we're only about 25, 30 years into the experience of that first century church. That Agabus showed by the Spirit that there was going to be a great famine throughout all the world, which also happened in the days of Claudius Caesar. And then the disciples, each according to his ability, determined to send relief to the brethren dwelling in Judea. So when Jesus said that there are going to be pestilences and famines, that had a fulfillment in that very generation. From an extra biblical source now, ironically, not all that long ago, I guess it maybe is about 9 years ago, NBC website gave this particular headline: "Proof of famine during Roman siege unearthed in Jerusalem." And you can see the web address that is provided there. That article went on to state that from an archaeological perspective, cooking pots and ceramic lamps were found in an ancient cistern near the western wall, the Israel Antiquities Authority announced. Excavators believe these artifacts were left in the underground chamber by Jewish residents who were trying to eat what little food they had in secret during the war. This is the war in which Roman generals came and sieged Jerusalem, and warfare as it was conducted in that day was often a long, month after month project in which they basically starved the residents of the city until they would give in and surrender. The historian Flavius Josephus provided the seminal account of the Roman siege of Jerusalem and the desperate hunger that accompanied it in his book, The Jewish War. He wrote about how residents in the city concealed their food and ate in secret, fearing it would be stolen by the rebels. Such is a brief summary of famine in the Bible. Famine today most likely the result more of governments and war, and also God's allowing it to happen. But from a human perspective, this quotation from Henry Kissinger back in the mid-70s is actually kind of chilling when we think about what's happening today. Who controls the food supply controls the people. Who controls the energy can control whole continents. Who controls money can control the world. Stated back in the mid-70s, but how fulfilling it seems to be today. Who controls the food supply controls the people. Who controls the energy can control the whole continents. Who controls money can control the world. All three of those factors, food, energy, and money, are very significant issues for our entire world today. Again, if you do a little bit of investigation on the internet, you can find all sorts of sources pertaining to this. Here's one. From the website Frontiers, where scientists empower society. The headline read, UN Food Systems Summit 2021, Dismantling Democracy and Resetting Corporate Control of Food Systems. Article occurring in April of 2021. Interesting choice of words there. Dismantling democracy, resetting corporate control of food systems. At the outset of the article, it tells you what it's going to be about. This article analyzes the development and organization of the United Nations Food Systems Summit, which is being convened by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in late 2021. Although few people will dispute that global food systems need transformation, it has become clear that the summit is instead an effort by a powerful alliance of multinational corporations, philanthropies, and export-oriented countries to subvert multilateral institutions of food governance and capture the global narrative of food systems transformation. That is a mouthful right there. Mouthful, pun intended, huh? This organization instead seems to be following a trajectory in which efforts to govern global food systems in the public interest has been subverted to maintain colonial and corporate forms of control. Quite a detailed article. So it tells you at the front what the article is going to be about, and then at the end of the article, it provides, I think it was 7 conclusions. I'm going to share 3 of those. Excluding voices of producers and workers on the front lines and pushing people who are already marginalized even farther from meaningful participation. I'm sorry, I jumped a slide there. Let me back up. Let me back up one slide. The first conclusion is this: capturing the narrative of food systems transformation so that it aligns with the kinds of technologies promoted by AGRA, which is an acronym for Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, and the WEF, World Economic Forum. So, what is this saying? These organizations are integral. They are attempting to write the narrative for the future as to how food is going to be managed and distributed. Capturing the narrative of food systems transformation so that it aligns with the purposes of these organizations. Now, here's what I mentioned earlier, and I did so prematurely. Another conclusion: excluding the voices of producers and workers on the front lines and pushing people who are already marginalized even farther from meaningful participation. In other words, we're going to take it out of the arena of the smaller entities and put it into large entities. Why? For control. Another conclusion: propping up the illusion that a single global food system based on trade and economic integration of smallholders into global markets will ensure sustainable food security at a time when the COVID-19 pandemic and looming climate emergencies portend the dangers of relying on global supply chains. We're going to take it out of the arena of what's local and put it into those larger entities. Continuing on with this conclusion, each of these outcomes is dangerous for its potential to overturn hard-won achievements of civil society. Well, those are a lot of big words there. But the bottom line is it's about control. Controlling the future of how food is produced and how food is distributed. And seems to suggest that it is an alignment between globalists, government, and corporations. There are about 10 major food corporations that really control much of the world's food. You see them listed on the screen. Here's another article speaking about what's taking place currently and is projected to continue into the future. New controlled food system is now in place. Now in place. Talks about vertical farming. Brand new term for me here in preparing for this message. Vertical indoor farming. Imagine a day where farmers markets no longer exist. You can't drive over to your local farmer to buy produce or cuts of meat. And the only food growing outside of the globalists' secured indoor vertical farming and lab-grown meat facilities is in your windowsill, your garden, or your greenhouse. The indoor vertical farming industry was valued at $5.5 billion in the year 2020 and is projected to reach $19.8 billion by 2026. Urban indoor farming controlled by the globalists is the future of food they have reimagined, and it's already in thousands of grocery stores without people realizing it. Whereas the U.S. is leading in this industry, this is a global agenda with vertical farms popping up across the globe. Had you heard of vertical farming before today? I had not heard of vertical farming 2 weeks ago. Brand new concept for me. Didn't even know it existed. And the first time I heard that word, I go, what is vertical farming? One example of a vertical farm is a business called Bowery Farming in Arlington, Texas. This is a photograph of part of their indoor facilities, and it's designed to feed 16 million people within a 200-mile radius of Dallas-Fort Worth. 16 million people. The food industry is already monopolized by 10 companies, the majority of which include Vanguard and BlackRock as top shareholders. What happens when they control all of the seeds, the produce, and the meat? What happens when produce and meat are all grown inside secured facilities after a gene splice or inside a petri dish, and farmland becomes dormant due to overreaching regulations, lack of supplies, and manufactured inflation? Those are questions that are being asked by some who have concerns about what is taking place in the future with the projection that this indoor farming, vertical farming, will continue to grow. Ironically, and some think this has no connections whatsoever, and it may not, we're just simply acknowledging what has taken place. Since the start of this year, 2022, over a dozen major food processing and fertilizer plants have gone up in flames, they have exploded, or been struck by a plane crash. And you can see the states listed there. There are 12 or 13 states. So, is it just coincidence, or is there something else going on by the way of sabotage in order to change the way food is managed and distributed now in order to occur a transformation? I don't know at this point. We don't know. Were these processing and fertilizer plants Was something behind that intentional, or was it just spontaneous? I would say we don't know yet, but time will tell in the future. Also, if you've been paying attention to the news, you know that there's a lot of unrest over in the Netherlands, Holland. The farmers are protesting. They are driving their tractors, and they're bringing stuff on their tractors and their trailers to spread in the streets. They're spreading it around, the manure, that is, because they are angry at how the government is targeting them to rein in emissions of nitrogen oxide and ammonia. They say that this restriction for the future threatens to wreck their agricultural way of life and put them out of business. The government says emissions of nitrogen oxide and ammonia, which livestock produce, must be drastically reduced to nature areas that are a part of a network of protected habitats for endangered plants and wildlife. But the farmers are arguing that they are being unfairly targeted while other industries such as aviation, construction, and transport also are contributing to emissions and face less far-reaching rules. That other industries are not having the restrictions placed upon them as the restrictions placed upon the farmer. They also say that government is not giving them a clear picture of their futures amid the proposed reforms. So we go back to that secular prophet, Henry Kissinger. Who controls the food supply controls the people. Who controls the energy can control whole continents, and who controls money can control the world. Well, they think they're controlling it. And in a measure they are. Globalists, government, corporations. And a lot of it centers around the common issue of climate change. This coming from the UN's website. The world's food supply is made insecure by climate change. One brief sentence from that article: in the next 30 years, food supply and food security will be severely threatened if little or no action is taken to address climate change and the food system's vulnerability to climate change. Now, as you recall from an earlier message in this series, Watch, Pray, Be Ready, we talked a little bit about the Great Reset and the World Economic Forum. That was 2 or 3 months ago now. And again, I don't know how connected you are to the news or how you get your information, but it seems like there are more and more and more voices speaking with concern about the World Economic Forum. And you recall from the leader, the director of the World Economic Forum himself, that we noted his own words as it relates to the Great Reset and the COVID-19 pandemic. This comes from Klaus Schwab's book, COVID-19, The Great Reset. COVID-19 lockdowns may be gradually easing, but anxiety about the world's social and economic prospects is only intensifying. To achieve a better outcome, the world must act jointly and swiftly to revamp all aspects of our societies and economies, from education to social contracts and working conditions. In short, we need a great reset of capitalism. Every industry from oil and gas to tech must be transformed. That is slightly, again, prophetic in nature. Every industry from oil and gas to tech must be transformed. That would include food, would it not? Every industry. Okay, now, if you thought that might be a little bit startling, here's something else that kind of even layers it up one more. Bugs and the future of meat. Taken from a website, Chemistry for life. Based on an idea that has the attention of several researchers and conservationists and international agencies, including the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, market researchers expect the global edible bug market to grow nearly 30% over the next 5 years, reaching $3 billion by 2027. And with a little bit of a smile in his pen, the author writes, so what is the buzz all about? The gist of it is this: raising land animals that give us much of our protein contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions that drive climate change. There it is. It all comes back to climate change. Plant-based foods such as nuts, legumes, grains, and vegetables, that should be very familiar to most of us, also contain protein and have a much lower environmental footprint than meat. But they might not satisfy everyone's taste. Insect farming could be a more sustainable solution to help meet the world's growing nutritional needs. When compared to other animal protein sources, farmed insects emit less greenhouse gases, they need less land, and they need less water. So, insects could be well positioned to help feed the world while having a smaller impact on the planet. And the best part, according to proponents, they're tasty. I did not add that. That was in the article. Oh, my. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking. Wasn't there someone in the Bible that maybe ate insects? Do you know who I'm talking about? No? John the Baptist. Mark chapter 1. He ate locusts and wild honey. Now, that particular word in that context is debatable, whether it refers to some type of a bean pod or bugs. But if you go back to Leviticus 11, in which God gave a listing of what is clean and edible and what is not clean and not for human consumption, locusts, 2 or 3 varieties, are included. So we don't know exactly what John ate. But even if he did eat them, doesn't sound very appetizing to me today. We've already noted this, but it bears repeating. Impacts of climate change are affecting how societally we deal with food. Who controls the food supply controls the people. Who controls the energy can control whole continents. Who controls money can control the world. But who is ultimately in control? He's got the whole world in his hands. This series that we do on the first weekend of the month is Watch, Pray, Be Ready. Some of the things that we look at here, actually quite a bit of what we look at here, are things that are fluid. They are in motion. We're not necessarily drawing specific conclusions about them. We're simply putting it on the table, putting it on the radar, so to speak, to say, hey, pay attention. Watch this. Keep aware of what's going on. Will climate change and food factor into issues of worship in the scenario that we read about in Revelation 13, which is very familiar to those of us in the Adventist community? But for those who are not familiar with Revelation 13, it describes a future period of time in which the whole world will be brought to a decision point in regards to worship. Worshiping what the Bible describes as a beast system or worshiping the Creator God of heaven. Again, we're going to watch and pray and be ready. My hunch is that yes, climate change will continue to be an even more significant factor as we approach the realities of Revelation 13. But we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to evaluate as we go along. Famine and food are part of the end time scenario that we see in the Bible. Maybe you saw this yesterday in the up-to-date newsletter. Things are not falling apart. They are falling into place. So rather than get, all worried and antsy, maybe that's a good word as well. Chocolate covered? I don't know. All worried and antsy. I didn't plan that. That was just spontaneous. About what's going to happen with our food. Can we trust God today? And can we pursue a healthy lifestyle as much as we can today and tomorrow and next? Yes, we can do that. Because He's got the whole world in His hands, and He's got you and me in His hands. And as we look back at famine that occurred in the days of Elijah, God took care of him during a time of famine. Don't know if it was, a crunch wrap burrito that was delivered by the ravens. But God took care of his basic needs. So as we go from what's happening in the world and we think about how we are to relate to this, I simply want to remind you of some things that we have looked at previously. And I'm doing this in the echo of Peter when he wrote in his second letter, I will not be negligent to remind you always of these things, though you know and are established in the present truth. I'm going to remind you that we've read earlier from Jesus in Matthew chapter 24, he who endures to the end shall be saved. And that has a sister text for us in Revelation chapter 14. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. These are texts that we stand on by faith. But in the day-to-day and the week-to-week, here are the specifics that I want to remind you about. Hold possessions loosely. 1 Timothy chapter 6. Godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain that we can carry nothing out. And having food and clothing, with these we shall be content. Food and clothing, basic necessities. Could be outdoors, may not have a shelter of our own, but food and clothing. With these we are going to be content. So hold possessions loosely. Secondly, love the truth. Paul wrote to the Thessalonians, the coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan with all power, signs and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth that they might be saved. Sharon was telling me of a conversation that she had with a young adult in their 20s just a couple of days ago. And this young adult made some comments about what they had seen in the news. And the young adult said, I think some of the things that I learned in some of those Bible classes might start to come true. We can know the information, but do we love the truth? Do we cherish the truth? Do we have an affection for the truth? Big difference. Which leads us to our next verse. Place your affections on the infinite value of knowing Christ Jesus. Philippians chapter 3, Paul the apostle writes, "What things were gained to me, these I have counted loss for Christ, yet indeed I also count all things loss for the excellence of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them as rubbish that I may gain Christ." And then we go back to Peter for another quality to nourish and to embrace. Rejoice amidst the trials in the coming of Jesus. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his abundant mercy has begotten us to a living hope through a resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled, and it does not fade away. It's reserved in heaven for you, who are kept by the power of God through faith for salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time. In this future inheritance you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials. Let the genuineness of your faith, being more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ, whom, having not seen, you love. You rejoice in this with joy that is inexpressible and full of glory. And then Peter again comes at it from a slightly different angle. The day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Therefore, since all these things will be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness? In other words, as we think about the food crisis going on, we don't need to become obsessed with the food crisis, but we should be focused upon pursuing holiness and godliness. Beloved, looking forward to these things, be diligent to be found in him in peace, without spot and blameless. Yes, watch, pray, be ready, but focus on that which is to come, which is certain, the return of Jesus. Hold possessions loosely. Love the truth. Embrace the infinite value of knowing Christ Jesus. Rejoice amidst our trials. Pursue holiness and godliness. Hebrews wraps it up for us in its 12th chapter. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. What are we to do in light of that? Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. And there it is again. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. I'm glad I'm in church this morning. And I think that you are too. Because although we have looked at some of the chaos in the world, we have refreshed, rebooted, recentered our attention and our affection once again upon that which will not fail.